Let's talk about claiming Helldivers 2, shall we? As I've seen the question as to whether we should, whether we shouldn't, etc. pop up in my comment sections a fair few times recently. And Helldivers 2 is of course in the news media right now for the same reason that Helldivers 2 seems to always pop up in the news media, namely that one of its developers says something particularly outlandish. And I think basically saying that the Helldivers 2 community have been brainwashed to fight for a fascist state is, it's up there. It might actually even be more outlandish than the time one of their community managers started banning people for reacting negatively to furry posts. Yeah, Helldivers 2 have had an interesting relationship with public relations for quite some time now. A downright deviant relationship with PR, in fact. So, these were of course the words of Arrowhead CEO, Pillistad, and he has, to an extent, walked this back a little bit. Now, before we get into the claiming question, I do want to bring this up real quick because it's quite fundamental to the rest of the claiming thing. So, this is in response to the PC Gamer article where all of this was listed and mentioned, where Pillistad says, "Hey, yeah, I was a bit uncareful with how I expressed this, and didn't realize it could be picked up as something negative." Truly now? Really? Our players are brainwashed to fight for a fascist regime, and our evil side grunts is not something that you might that you didn't quite pick up on could be viewed in a negative fashion. Alrighty then. I don't know if I buy that, but fair enough. They reached out to us after the game blew up to talk about what role satire in games play in psychological defense against totalitarianism, that is in relations to the invitation by the United Nations. They quote on us wanting to brainwash the community was made as a note on getting everyone to roleplay the message of a totalitarian state of Super Earth. Now, if that was indeed the case, it was not at all communicated in the actual article, as the complete quote here is. Of course, you might start to wonder how fun it'll actually be once you consider the implications of dressing players up in fascist uniforms and calling them to arms under the banner of an imperial state to die, die, and die again in the name of democracy. We asked ourselves, could we brainwash an entire community to fight for a fascist state? Would they? Would we be okay with that? And turns out, yeah, actually, Pillistad said in his talk. Again, if this was the point you wanted to communicate, it was not communicated at all in the article, either through omission or good old-fashioned malice, as is all too common in the PC gaming media. So this comes across as Pillistad kind of going like, yeah, no, the article takes me out of context, I was misread, etc. I didn't understand how this could be spun negatively. But then he immediately follows up with, actually, reading the article fully, I think it covers it pretty well, but the title is a bit clickbaity. So this is one of the big things here when it comes to the question of claiming Helldivers 2, because on the one hand, I think that Helldivers 2 is in many ways already claimed. Now, claiming things is a bit of a vague term in and of itself, but in essence it is to lay claim to pieces of media, entertainment, video games, movies, all of these cultural things. Because if we do not do so, as in our wider cultural movement, we will inevitably, eventually, lose all forward momentum. We will no longer be able to stand for anything positive, or present anything positive from our side. We will not have culture on our side. And being able to claim things is something that our opposition in the progressive left have been able to do incredibly well, to the point where they will attempt to claim quite literally anything and everything, regardless of how hostile the ground is. Helldivers 2 is in fact a bit of an example of this, as they actually end this article by saying that the game is on sale and they want people to pick it up, because they now see an opportunity to get more influence within Helldivers 2, even if that also requires them to present it in a highly negative way in an effort to try and push out the grouping that is already there, as I believe we have already in large parts claimed Helldivers 2. As far as I can tell, the majority of the already existing audience for Helldivers 2 is, well, more or less our side sorts of people. The people capable of engaging with a piece of entertainment as escapism and role-playing with it. Additionally, Helldivers 2 and the studio made some really excellent moves. For example, the No Politics, Only Democracy, where they banned people on both the left and the right, and they denied requests to introduce pride capes into the game, arguing that the game would not be political, that there was a place for political discussions, but it was not in a third-person shooter. I was all for this. Ecstatic, in fact. Fantastic. That is exactly what should happen. Then one of the community managers says that no, we only ban the bigots, transphobes, homophobes, racists, etc., and are not welcome in our community. Now, at this point, these are all code words. Transphobes, homophobes, racists, etc., the bigots are simply just anyone who is not left-wing. This then continued, where people were being banned and suspended for reacting negatively, just adding in little emotes to LGBT posts. That was enough to get you yeeted off the server. Furthermore, the community managers themselves apparently ruled over the servers as their own little personal fiefdoms. They blatantly lied about influencers, accusing them of straight-up crimes, in fact, and also banned people for reacting negatively to their own art. The Helldivers 2 actual team, the developers themselves and the community moderators, do not appear in any way whatsoever to embrace any idea of neutrality. And Pillarstad himself is an interesting example of this, where he will say both things. He will say, yeah, this was a bit, I was a bit uncareful here, the interpretation is a bit uncharitable, this is a bit clickbaity and weird PC gamer, and then immediately move on to say, actually, I think it was perfectly fine. Pillarstad has a long history now of basically saying both things, saying that the game is not political, and then saying that the game actually has political elements, and so on and so on. Now, partially, I believe that this is because Pillarstad himself doesn't really understand a lot of the philosophy or thoughts behind this, as kind of demonstrated in this conversation with my buddy Barkima's Bowels here. So he brings up a couple of interesting points that Pillarstad doesn't quite seem to fully grasp. I don't think he has a fully functional definition of fascism, especially not in the idea of Super Earth being fascist. Now, it is a totalitarian state, absolutely. Whether or not he's fascist is up to a lot of debate. For example, in this article, the primary thrust of it, shall we say, declaring Super Earth fascist, is in essence that Super Earth is fighting against other things. It is fighting against the robots, it is fighting against the bugs, it is fighting against the aliens. And in the original Helldivers 2 lore, it was indeed Super Earth that started a fair few of these conflicts, but that was 100 years ago. Meanwhile, now, Super Earth is just kind of trying to not get genocided by ferocious predator bugs on the one hand, by robots with torture camps on the other that grind civilians up into paste to turn them into their soldiers, or aliens turning them into disgusting zombie creatures. Any crimes that Super Earth committed 100 years ago is frankly near entirely irrelevant in the face of the genocide being committed against Super Earth today. The most damning condemnation you can really levy against Super Earth is the idea of managed democracy, which on the one hand could actually be a genuine reflection of an automated form of democracy, where the computer goes, okay, I understand you so well that I can predict what you would vote for that would be in your political best, regardless of what the computer wanted. That is one theory. The other is, of course, that it's basically the United Nations. where you will vote for whatever you are told to vote for, where unelected leaders will decide on the result before you can say anything, where they can simply declare that so and so much will be spent in these and these ways, because it's not a democracy at all. It is a sham democracy, designed in fact to try and trick you into believing that you have power in a system where you in essence have none. Which, well, one can certainly make the argument that the United Nations is fascist, or at the very least heading in that general direction, but I don't think that's quite the point being made here, particularly not as, well, the United Nations were asking for the Helldivers 2 devs to come and speak to them on defense against totalitarianism. See, that is the interesting thing. The question of claiming Helldivers 2. On the one hand, I argued the same as I did with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is kind of our main contention point on a lot of this. If you simply call out the Musa of Mali thing, for example, perhaps call out the abundance of strong female characters, and a couple of the other relatively minor woke elements, then you are left with a game that is 98% Christian. That is 98% our game. When you strip away the Musa of Mali and the banging your best friend in the butt all of a sudden, the vast majority is our game. And thus claiming it, or simply just ignoring it and allowing it to remain the vast majority our game, is the best option, particularly as the game developers themselves, even though Daniel Vavra has made a concerted effort to muddy the waters there, also appear to be largely our guys, although Vavra himself is a victim now, in my opinion, of the progressives' love-bombing campaign, or suddenly talking to him like he's the best guy ever. Hey, we're from the media, we love your stuff. Wouldn't it be better if it was more diverse the next time around? I suspect Pillistad is on the receiving end of exactly this same thing, getting loved-bombed by the establishment, and it is only natural to lean towards people who are nice to you. Now, here is where the difference comes in. Whereas Warhorse Studios, I give the benefit of the doubt. They seem to be majoritively our guys. In the case of Arrowhead Studios, I can quite confidently declare that they are not our guys. The closest we've got to our guy there is Pillistad, and he seems to say everything that will please everyone, frankly, and seems to himself again have a rather limited understanding of the topics that he himself is discussing, which is not an attack against the man himself. It is simply just a thing that, well, you haven't spent a few hundred hours looking into this extraordinarily complicated piece of political philosophy, not to mention fascism, of course, which is one of the single worst defined political ideas in human history, rivaled only by the politics of the Neanderthals, in essence. But there is the key contention then. Helldivers 2 appears to be a video game that has already again been majoritively claimed by our side on the audience, and thus simply ignoring it and allowing it to remain that way is the correct solution. We have in essence already claimed Helldivers 2. However, due to the fact that the developers have demonstrably shown us that they are not on our side by outright lying, by actively going after the bigots, quote-unquote, by abusing their power as hard as they conceivably can, the stick should nevertheless be applied wherever necessary. See, the stick is a tool of fear, of terror. In the case of somebody who is already on our side, wielding the stick against them will only drive them to our opposition. In the case of somebody who is not on our side, and demonstrably so, the stick is a tool of chastisement. It is a reminder of who's truly in charge, or at the very least an attempt to remind them of that. However, we should also not move against Helldivers 2 without cause, which is why I don't do that. I only mention these things as usually crimes against the players perpetrated by the developers. The developers are the target here. not the game. In fact, my previous announcement that Helldivers 2 would ruin itself based on a players versus developer mentality, well, it came true, and then Pillarstad stepped in and actually got rid of that key core problem, after which the game has rebounded enormously. Pillarstad appears to be the most level-headed of the developers and has genuinely done amazing things with Helldivers 2. It's just that I don't think he quite understands the, again, nuances of what's going on around the game. So, to finally summarize this all up, should we claim Helldivers 2? Yes, I believe we already have. We have already claimed the audience. However, we should also move against the developers whenever they say something particularly idiotic, because we have not claimed them by any stretch of the imagination. And so they won't merely just say dumb shit like Daniel Vavra, or, he did say a lot of dumb shit, and contradict himself actively. They will do, well, this sort of stuff, expressly political stuff. Whereas again, I do believe that there is a degree of deniability, enough at least to extend a degree of dubiousness towards Warhorse Studios. I do not believe that same assumption of goodwill exists with Arrowhead Studios, not at all, meaning that this is definitely hostile ground and should be treated as such. The stick should be applied to the developers whilst being withheld from the game, because it is the developers that are doing these things, not the game. I, in essence, also think that there is nothing necessarily that needs to be done immediately, other than, again, simply just calling out the overreach of the developers, an attempt to sour the relationship between developers and the mainstream gaming media. Now, we can't do anything about the United Nations, but again, we must recognize that this is a part of the progressive tactic. This is how they claim things. I've talked about this in the previous on the Why to Claim video. We claim things by popular acclaim. We claim things by being the majority of the user group, by being the majority of the customers, by being the consumers. And we become those by changing culture, by making the majority of consumers agree with us, giving us the power to declare whether or not a piece of entertainment, will be successful or not. Meanwhile, the progressives claim things via corporate control. They claim it by love bombing, by moving into management positions, by moving into being community managers, by moving into the team themselves at HR departments, and making sure that only the correct people get hired. That is the two different forms of influence. We are the outside. We are, at the moment, as we have quite clearly demonstrated, the majority, and our arguments resound better with the rest of the majority, the 98%. They are the insiders. They are the ones who move within the industry and attempt to use it to gain authority and power, which is, for the final time, the reason why the developers should still be granted the full attention of the stick whenever possible, in the case of Helldivers 2. That's about all I've got to say on that topic. Hopefully it made a degree of sense, and yes, continue to play Helldivers 2, continue to claim it, and just simply bear in mind that the people who made it probably actually genuinely do hate you. Until then, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.